bank, not called a bank, of course, but just put on deposit into somebody else's vault a certain amount of gold. And in return for that, the goldsmith issued a paper receipt. He said, okay, here's the proof that I have your gold. You have this piece of paper, and anytime you want your gold back, just bring the piece of paper back. It's your receipt, and I will honor it. Well, with the passage of time and the developing of a tradition of the fact that the goldsmith did honor those receipts, more and more people thought that was a good idea. And the first thing you know, the goldsmith was doing a bigger business in guarding other people's gold than they were doing in manufacturing jewelry. It became a new business for them. And so these receipts were circulated eventually widely throughout the community. Well, I shouldn't say circulated because that's the next stage. The first stage of receipt money did not circulate because the receipts were issued to a particular person. Let's say John Doe. John Doe, it says on this piece of paper, is hereby entitled to 10 ounces of gold. It's his gold, and if John Doe brings this piece of paper back, we'll give him 10 ounces of gold. Well, John Doe found that to be okay because he didn't have to guard his gold, but he couldn't use that piece of paper because if he gave it to someone else, they're not John Doe. So eventually, if they wanted to exchange gold or these pieces of paper, what would have to happen is John Doe would have to go to the goldsmith, take his gold out, and then go make the transaction to Bill Brown, and then Bill takes the gold back to the goldsmith and gets a new receipt, which is kind of cumbersome. So finally they figured out, why don't we just change the receipts? So it doesn't say John Doe on there anymore, it just says, to the bearer. Whoever's holding this piece of paper. So, to the bearer, on demand, is a famous phrase we remember from the money we used to have in this country. It always said, to the bearer, on demand. That goes all the way back to antiquity with these receipts from the warehouse. So now, John Doe's got a receipt that says, to the bearer, on demand, and he can take it to Bill Brown, and Bill Brown will take the receipt because he knows that he can take the receipt to the goldsmith and get the gold. And then to make it even more convenient, instead of giving one receipt for 10 ounces of gold, the goldsmith would give 10 receipts, each for 1 ounce of gold. Or maybe give 100 receipts, each for 1/10 of an ounce of gold. And this made it easier with all these pieces of paper to conduct transactions in commerce. And voila, paper money was born. It's just a means of circulating receipts for something that is on deposit in the vault. Perfectly good money as long as the goldsmith keeps his word and as long as you don't lose the piece of paper or have it stolen from you. But so that is receipt money, nothing wrong with it, and that's the origin of all paper money in the world today. But now we move to type number 3, and this is where the fun begins for the goldsmith. It's called fractional money in my lexicon, fractional money. And that means that the receipt eventually came to represent less than what it says on the receipt. There was only a fraction of that amount of gold in the vault. And one doesn't really know how this evolved, but it's certainly easy to imagine that one day the son of the goldsmith was in the vault looking at these stacks of gold coins. And he came to his father. He says, you know, Father, he said, this is interesting. We've got all this gold in here, and it never leaves. Nobody wants it. Maybe 3% of the people come in and ask for their gold because they're perfectly content circulating the paper receipts. So why do we worry about them coming and asking for their gold? They never have and never will, any more than 3%. Why don't we issue a few more receipts than we actually have? Nobody will ever know the difference. They'll never find out. And the father probably resisted the idea. But when the old man died, it takes over the business. He says, I'm going to give this a try. And so he issues paper receipts and puts them into circulation to buy things, or maybe he'll loan these paper receipts out to people at interest. And the person taking the receipt cannot tell the difference between this one and the one that was issued the day before that really did have gold behind it, they all look the same. They all say there's gold behind it. But now we know that there isn't. There's not enough gold in the vault anymore to cover all of the receipts that are out there. And so the amount that is held in reserve is called a fraction of the total obligation. And that's why they call it fractional reserve banking in modern terms, because there's only a fraction of the amount in the vault or in reserve for the amount that's in circulation in the form of receipt money. And so probably what happened then is that after the kid takes over the business and he grows old and his son comes along and he says, "Dad, you know, you've only been issuing 10% more receipts than we have in gold. That's kind of stupid. Nobody comes in more than 3%. Why don't we increase that fraction of loans from 10 to maybe 20 or 30%? We're still covered, you know." The old man probably resisted the idea, but when he passed away, the kid takes over. They go into 30%. And when he grows older and dies, the next kid comes along and says, "Let's go 60 to 70%. And then the next one goes to 90%, and we're in the modern age. And that's how banking works. It's fractional money. So there is not enough gold or silver in the vault or any place else to back up all of those paper receipts. And nobody knows the difference. They all think it's good money. And it is good money as long as people don't demand their gold or their silver. So then we move now finally to the fourth kind of money, which is fiat money. And this is the kind of money that has absolutely no meaningful reserves behind it whatsoever. It just has the power of government behind it. And whenever you find fiat money, I should say, whenever you find fiat money, you will always find what they call legal tender laws. Legal tender laws are decrees by the government which force everyone to accept this money. You must accept it or you go to prison. You might think that's strange. Why would you have to force people to accept money? It's because there's nothing behind it. And if people had an option, they might start going back to gold and silver or wheat or cattle or something like that. So you must not allow your subjects to escape into something else other than the paper money. So they pass legal tender laws, which usually sound very benign because the active phrases are that this money is good for all debts, legal and private, which that part is fine. But then you read further along and it says anybody refusing to accept this money will be punished severely. And in some nations, in some societies, even punished by death. So they're not kidding around. These rulers do not want you to escape and be free to not use their money. The interesting thing that I observed when learning all of this was that fractional money never lasts. It always evolves into fiat money. And so in reality, you might say there are only three kinds of money. And fractional money is fiat money in transition. So I wouldn't want to argue with anybody over whether that is a category of its own. But every time fractional money has been instituted in history, it has always evolved into pure fiat money. And every time fiat money has existed in history, the system has been destroyed by it. There are no exceptions. So that should not be an element of comfort to us today, knowing that we have been in fractional money for decades now. It has evolved into 100% fiat money, and we are now in the chute of history. Now, thinking back over that, we must remember that paper money can be receipt money. It can be good, but fiat money is always paper money. It can be nothing else. The first written record of paper money and real fiat money was found in the writings of Marco Polo. And when he traveled to China in the 13th century, he came back and kept a very complete diary, as you know. And one of the most fascinating things in his diary is his description of the world's first recorded record of fiat money.